Cecilia.
Thank you, Martin. Good morning, everyone. Wonderful to see so many of you here. When I was on the plane flying back from the Symposium on the Spiritual Geometry of Ibn Arabi, which was held in Seville in March this year, my thoughts turned to the title of this symposium. And following Ibn Arabi's advice, I jotted down the first 3 ideas that occurred to me in relation to how Ibn Arabi's legacy is still alive in today's world. The first thing that occurred to me was fresh nourishment. The second was constant renewal of creation. And the third was non-fixity of belief. Meanwhile, the words of my working title kept on coming back to me, refreshing, repose and a reviving scent, as a reminder that it's the spirit that gives life to things. So my working title is still my title, refreshing, repose and a reviving scent, Rauchen wa Raihanen. As we know and are celebrating here, Ibn Arabi was born 850 years ago and died some 775 years ago. Yet what he has written still has a freshness which is felt and understood differently each time, demonstrating the vibrant power of the word. Already in this millennium, Ibn Arabi's ideas have not only inspired academics, believers, thinking people and lovers of truth worldwide, but they've captured the imagination and provided substance for films, video installations, art, dance, novels, poetry and music. This talk will examine the way in which Ibn Arabi's legacy is still alive today by looking at the ideas he has left us and exploring some of the themes he himself writes about in relation to life, which keeps his legacy alive. This includes breath, the self, compassion, spirit, wind and scent. Since Ibn Arabi writes from the viewpoint of unity, all these themes are inevitably inextricably linked with each other and with everything that is, arising as they do from a single source. But first of all, this being the Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi Society, I'd like to look at this title, Muhyiddin, given to Ibn Arabi, and especially as this afternoon we shall have an opportunity to see the film by the Tunisian director Nasr Hamir, entitled Looking for Muhyiddin. It is part of the conceit of the film that contributors were required not to mention the name of Ibn Arabi, allowing many people who see the film to suppose that Mohideen, the person that the main protagonist is searching for, is still alive, although for members and friends of this society, his identity is of no surprise. The first time I went to Damascus, I was amazed to find that the little minibuses that take you to where Ibn Arabi is buried had Muhyiddin written in Arabic on the front, and that the whole area around his tomb is called Muhyiddin. Muhyiddin means the revivifier of the religion. Muhyi from the Arabic root hay, meaning life, and adin, meaning religion. This title was certainly true for his time, and it still holds true in many regions. But in today's world, where religion is on the decline in numerous countries, is this name still relevant? Of course, Ibn Arabi was a devout Muslim who followed the precepts of the religion of Islam. However, he was not a blind imitator, and always insisted on verifying truths for himself from the most essential and life-giving source, and it is in this way that he breathes life into the religion. He was open to questioning all beliefs and upholding their validity as an expression of a person's connection to reality, however limited or all-encompassing that might be. It's a mark of the universality of Ibn Arabi that his writings still provide spiritual nourishment, raising questions and offering valid answers to the kinds of issues which concern all human beings. No particular group can claim his legacy as belonging exclusively to them, for it is a legacy that has been preserved by all of those who have recognized its value. Then what does it mean to address all humanity, not just those of a particular religious tradition or who admit to being aware of the spiritual aspect of their life? The universality of many of Ibn Arabi's writings enables them to form a bridge between Islam and the West. Known as the greatest master, as Sheikh al-Akbar in the Islamic world, he has had a huge influence on both mainstream Islam and Sufi thought. It is true that some of his ideas have sometimes been seen as controversial, often by people who have not actually read the original work in details themselves, who have misunderstood them, or who, at a time when there was little access to information, were afraid that their students might be confused by some of the things he said when taken out of context. In Ibn Arabi's time, his books were read within narrow circles, but now thousands of pages of his vast output are becoming available to almost anyone, as more of his work is published and translated. At a time when so few actually practice a religion, even if they claim to belong to one, especially in Britain, according to a recent Observer survey, what relevance could Ibn Arabi have in today's world? And in one sense, Ibn Arabi's actual writings are only likely to appeal to the self-selecting minority, perhaps like yourselves, those who are deeply interested in the spiritual life, in what it means to be an integrated human being, or simply curious about discovering who we really are. On the other hand, the ideas contained in Ibn Arabi's writings have always filtered into different cultures. Until fairly recently, this occurred mainly within the Islamic tradition, but Ibn Arabi's ideas also spread as far east as China, for example, where they were expressed in the language and frameworks of the prevailing culture, as Sachiko Murata has pointed out in her studies. More recently, in the 20th and 21st centuries, the Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi Society symposia and seminars in California and Seattle attest to the interest in his thought in the far West, such that Ibn Arabi's statement, "I realized that my words would reach the two horizons, that of the West and that of the East," has proved to be true. And it is Ibn Arabi's ideas on the singularity of the essence, the oneness of being, the complete human, beauty, love, compassion, the relationship of the spirit and the body, the imagination, the universe, and everything beyond it, whose wisdom speaks to all people when expressed in a language that they can understand. At certain stages in our life, nearly everyone experiences moments of heightened awareness, perhaps in times of danger, bereavement, loss, or overwhelming love, when they are catapulted into contact with the essence of life, or they question their meaning and purpose and ask themselves, as the artist Gauguin put it in the title of one of his paintings, "Where do we come from? Who are we? Where are we going?" Ibn Arabi's writings will always remain intact for those pearl divers who wish to plunge deeply into this sublime knowledge, whilst at the same time the overpoweringly compassionate response to all life's major existential questions can find expression in a language which is accessible to all humanity. For as Ibn Arabi writes in the Fusus al-Hikam, the ringstones of wisdom, God's essence is in the small and the great, those ignorant of how things are and those who know. Due to this, his compassion encompasses everything, from the most insignificant to the most magnificent. If words are his legacy, we are the ones who have the opportunity to unlock their meanings. If that legacy is living, then the meanings must be relevant to today's world, where, through the age of the internet, international media, observation from outer space, we are more aware than ever of the whole of humanity living on this earth, and the need to integrate all nations and all aspects of society in a way that is conducive to the preservation of life, whilst ensuring social justice and harmony by respecting, understanding and accepting the rich diversity of religions, cultures and beliefs. For many people nowadays, religion is regarded as something divisive, and people's identification with a particular religion is often seen as the cause of much conflict in the world. This is often to do with the opinion an individual or group has concerning what God is and what their religion promotes. Ibn Arabi writes, "Rational and speculative thinkers' opinions about God differ according to their view. The God which reason worships is devoid of faith, as though it were, no, rather it is, a God which is produced in accordance with the view of that rational faculty. Therefore the God's reality differs in accordance with every rational faculty, and they oppose each other. Each group of rational thinkers accuses the other of ignorance about God, and even if they are Muslim speculative thinkers who interpret, each group accuses the other of unbelief." Ibn Arabi encourages us not to tie ourselves to any one form of belief, but rather to accept all forms of belief without limiting God to any particular form. For God is too vast to be limited to a single form of belief. So there is a need to re-examine the true intention of religion, not as something divisive, but as something helpful for people, providing guidelines towards discovering their connection with a greater reality than their limited self, and a way of leading more fulfilling, compassionate and integrated lives. It concerns a direct and immediate connection with the single, all-encompassing reality, which includes everything that we can see and understand, as well as everything which is beyond our perception or comprehension. It necessarily includes all viewpoints and beliefs, since these all have a place and a value, even though some are more limited and some are more comprehensive. This is one of the reasons why Ibn Arabi was called Muhyiddin, the revivifier of the religion. He enlivens religion in a way that reinforces it according to its original link to the source, and at the same time goes beyond its own prescribed limitations. Ibn Arabi has a particular understanding of the word for religion, and many of us are familiar with his most famous lines of poetry. "I follow the religion of love. Whatever way love's camels turn, that is my religion and my faith." Ultimately, religion concerns love, which unites rather than divides. So what is the true religion that is spoken of in the Quran? "Turn your face with purity toward the primordial religion, according to the innate nature with which God has made humankind. Do not allow what God has made to be corrupted. That is the authentic religion, but most people do not understand." We have already mentioned how Ibn Arabi breathes life into religion, and for him religion and spirituality have a close connection. In English, as in many languages, the word for spirit is related to the word for breath, from the Latin spiritus, the breath of life. For Ibn Arabi, the root letters that make up each word in Arabic are of great importance. In his writings, he is highly aware of the root of each word and all the meanings that can arise from that particular combination of letters. He constantly plays with words in this way, so please bear with me if I point out some of the meanings that are signified by the Arabic roots of words and which simultaneously evoke connected meanings. Ibn Arabi discusses 3 meanings of the Arabic word for religion in the chapter in the Fusus al-Hikam, on the wisdom of spirituality, or spiritual ease, in the word of Jacob. The Arabic word translated as spirituality or spiritual ease can be read as ruhiya or Rawhiya, as of course there are usually no vowels marked in the Arabic script. Both words are connected to ruh, or spirit, the root of which gives rise to meanings such as breath of life, repose or ease, joy, wind and scent or perfume. In Ibn Arabi's work, any ambiguity is usually intentional, since all readings have some validity. The case for reading the wisdom mentioned in the chapter heading as Rawhiya, repose or ease, comes from Jacob's words, as reported in the Quran, when he hoped to receive some news of his missing son Joseph and his brother, and said, "Do not despair of God's ease. No one despairs of God's ease except the people who cover the truth." On the other hand, the case for reading the wisdom mentioned in the chapter heading as Ruhiya, spirituality, is because Sadruddin al-Konavi, Ibn Arabi's stepson and spiritual heir, who favours this reading, points out, all three meanings of religion discussed are related to the spirit that governs the body and may bring repose to the soul. The first meaning Ibn Arabi gives to the Arabic word for religion, deen, is to do with conformity, inqiyad, or submission to reality as it really is, and allowing oneself to be led or guided according to what is right and true, since, as Ibn Arabi emphasizes, the root meaning of the word for Islam is submission. The second meaning of the word for religion has to do with recompense, jaza, that is, reward or punishment according to what brings true happiness or not, and this only happens according to our own state. Finally, the third meaning, which is related to this, is that which returns to us according to our state as a result of habitual practice, ada. Ibn Arabi writes that since religion is doing good, and since religion is habit, the Prophet mentioned that good is habit. This mention is good news from a knower of how things are, who is the messenger, that the soul is good by essence. This essential goodness of the soul leads it back eventually to its root, so that it is returned to its original state, and it ends up in compassion. Religion was not intended as a fetter which excessively constricts, binds and causes unnecessary conflict and suffering, but as a means of ultimately liberating human beings into a life of gratitude, praise, joy, expansion, fulfillment and harmony, a means of living a better life in this world where each successive moment has repercussions on the next. With regard to habit, Ibn Arabi emphasizes that in manifestation nothing is repeated and nothing returns to an identical previous state. Due to the infinite number of possibilities in the Absolute, there is no repetition in the divine self-revelation, and he points out that, in the view of the people who verify the truth, the real is too exalted to reveal himself in a single form twice, or to two individuals in the same way. Therefore, at each moment, there is the possibility of stepping out of that cycle and waking up to the total potential of the next instant, the miracle of what Ibn Arabi calls Khalq al-Jadid, a new creation at every moment, and we will return to this subject later. So here Ibn Arabi is speaking about religion in terms which apply universally to all human beings, whether in today's terminology they would call themselves religious or spiritual or not. At the same time, elsewhere, he writes at length about the specific practices of the religion of Islam and their profound meaning when followed devoutly. According to a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, which Ibn Arabi quotes, religion is good counsel. This good counsel or sincere advice is addressed to everyone, since it states in the Quran that Muhammad was sent to all people, and Ibn Arabi affirms that his community includes everyone, both believers and non-believers, and all are encompassed by compassion. Despite a certain impatience that Ibn Arabi sometimes found in dealing with students who were not totally devoted to following the spiritual path, he was obliged to continue to give sincere advice to all, since more than once he was directly commanded by God, "Counsel my servants." As a follower and heir to Muhammad, who was sent as a mercy to the universes, Ibn Arabi extends the mercy that he himself was shown as a generous giving through beneficence. In another vision he was told by God, "Make my servants know what you have perceived of my generosity. Why do my servants despair of my compassion, when my compassion embraces everything?" In Memories, Dreams, Reflections, the Swiss psychologist Carl Jung tells how his father, who was a Christian pastor, did not know the immediate living God. He could talk about God, but did not seem to have direct experience of his presence. Rather than relying on an intellectual knowledge about God and relegating the divine to a purely transcendent absence, Ibn Arabi emphasized the total absoluteness of God, which includes his immanence and closeness, that God is with us wherever we are, and we are not excluded from his presence. He mentions a saying of Abu Yazid al-Bastami, who berated exoteric scholars by saying, "You take your knowledge dead from the dead, but we take our knowledge from the living, who does not die." For Ibn Arabi remarks, "The giver has not died, and he is closer to you than your jugular vein." In this sense, Ibn Arabi leaves us his words as an incitement to verify their truth by a direct connection with their source. He mentions on more than one occasion the saying of Abu Madian, "Give us fresh nourishment, as God has said. Don't feed us dried flesh." This fresh nourishment alludes to the Quranic reference to the two seas, one of sweet water and one of salty water, and yet from both we eat fresh flesh. Ibn Arabi emphasizes the importance of listening to our hearts and our inmost conscience to see what inner knowledge arises, rather than relying solely on the outer knowledge which we acquire from books or from other people's interpretations, even though this may also have merit. Knowledge which is given without the interference of rational thought, something which we often refer to nowadays as inspired or creative thought, has an immediacy and a freshness which goes beyond our own limitations. Of course, Ibn Arabi is concerned here with knowledge of reality as it really is, and consequent action, not a superficial application of knowledge for our own ends. It was in this connection with the real that fresh nourishment was mentioned. Ibn Arabi writes, "Our Sheikh Abu Madian said about spiritual opening, 'Don't tell us about any other opening than that which has been opened to you in your hearts. Don't tell us about the openings of others.' By this he raised the aspiration of his companions to seek taking directly from God." Ibn Arabi gives excellent practical advice about this elsewhere, relating that when teachers ask their students questions in order to teach them about taking directly from God, they don't let them think about the answer, in case their answers are the result of speculation. Instead they say, "Only answer with what occurs to you immediately about what I asked, and see what is cast into your heart at the moment the question arrives." This advice could seem to counter the value of relying on the books of a long-dead mystic as a source of guidance. However, on the contrary, it provides an indication of how his writings may be read, for they constantly raise questions in the reader, which require a receptivity which goes beyond an intellectual understanding for the meanings to be opened up newly. And at each rereading, different meanings may occur to different people, according to their state and receptivity, and according to their questions, whether spoken or silent. Just as we ourselves and all existence are living words for Ibn Arabi, it is possible for us to engage with Ibn Arabi's words in a way that reaches to a living source which can be verified in ourselves and which encourages a constant listening to what is in the heart, seeing what occurs immediately, what our deepest, inmost consciousness is telling us in answer to our questions and about the right course of action at any particular moment, beyond the promptings of our base instincts and our own biased agenda. For as Ibn Arabi says, people know the state of their own soul, since human beings have insight about themselves, even though they make excuses. They can tell the falsehood from the sincerity in themselves, because no one is ignorant of their own state, since their state is experienced directly. In this way, Ibn Arabi provides us with spiritual sustenance in abundance, substantial nourishment which many people, whether engaged in some kind of spiritual way or not, yearn for, teachings which, like food and drink for the soul, conforming to the words that he himself sets down in one of the poems in the chapter on Jesus in the Fusus al-Hikam. Nourish his creation from him. Nourish his creation from him. You will be a refreshing repose and a reviving scent. The refreshing repose and a reviving scent alludes to the delights to come for those who are brought close in awareness of the divine presence, as in the Quranic verse which speaks of refreshing repose and a reviving scent and a garden of happiness, seeing that God is near. Again, the Arabic for refreshing repose and sweet scent, rauhan wa raihanan, derives from the same root as spirit, ruh, that brings ease and reviving scents, like the wind, rih, carrying joyful news to Jacob that his son Joseph is still alive. Through the spirit, there is a communication of life, and the effects are made evident in the world that is perceived by the senses. The invisible influences the visible, such that what we cannot see produces an effect on what we can see. This is no more surprising than the fact that scientists have inferred dark matter from its effects in the universe, even though dark matter, which astrophysicists generally agree makes up much of the matter in the known universe, cannot be seen even with telescopes. The effects which compassion, love, beauty, and every other invisible quality have on human beings and all life on earth testifies to the deep connection with life. But this is not something merely inferred through reason, but known directly and intuitively through inner vision. This immediate link with the source connects to all by means of a common source through the centre, axially rather than horizontally. However, Ibn Arabi explains that the eye of inner vision, which is the eye of the heart, is able to perceive the invisible world, although for most people it is usually covered over. This is linked to another of Ibn Arabi's major themes, which we have already mentioned, that the world is created newly at each instant, so that the life flowing through everything is continually renewed and reconfigured in a different form. If it were not for the veil of our own self, which prevents us from seeing the reality of how things are, Ibn Arabi says, we would perceive the perpetual renewal of things with each divine breath, which has its source in the Quranic verse, "They are in confusion about a new creation." This verse is commonly taken to refer to the transformation of God in different forms after physical death. Ibn Arabi writes, "If you are a believer, you will know that God will manifest himself on the day of resurrection, initially in a recognizable form, then in an unacceptable form, and finally back into a form readily recognized, he alone being the one who reveals himself in every form, although it is obvious that one form is not the same as another. However, Ibn Arabi tends to interpret scriptural references at many different levels, so they can be understood in both particular and universal ways, and received by each person according to the limits of their own context and degree of awareness. This transformation of forms in which the real discloses himself to each individual occurs equally at every moment, today, in this world, Ibn Arabi says, and can be applied to our own beliefs as well as to our attitude towards the beliefs of other people. Ibn Arabi writes, "The perfect knower of God recognizes him in every form in which he reveals himself, and in every form in which he descends. Other than the knower recognizes him only in the form of his belief, and denies him when he reveals himself to him in another form. He never stops tying himself to his own belief and denying the belief of others." So Ibn Arabi explains this and applies it in a way that also refers to the perpetually changing forms of the self-revelation of God at every moment. He writes, "It is as if the single essence were a mirror, so that when the observer sees in it the form of their belief about God, they recognize and agree to it. But if they happen to see in it someone else's belief, they reject it, just as in a mirror they can see their own form and that of another. The mirror is single, while the forms are many in the eyes of the observer." Only recognizing a particular defined form is therefore directly related to being tied to a particular form of belief, since we only see what we are prepared to see. Our structures of thought shape how we view the world and consequently how we act, whereas the heart capable of receiving every form recognizes that all forms are different manifestations of the one, and each has a certain validity for the person who sees it. While most people are confused by the similarity of the revelation that takes place at each breath, Ibn Arabi says those endowed with inner vision are able to perceive the renewal of creation with every breath, such that they are never bored, since they never experience the same world twice and are constantly in delight at the perpetual newness of creation. If we are open to this constant transformation, we are also open to new meanings which appear according to time and place, and able to receive the continually shifting relevance of Ibn Arabi's thought. The renewal of creation with each breath also refers back to the creation of Adam, who represents the prototype of the complete human being. Ibn Arabi states that the spirit communicates life to all that it touches, and also writes at length about the communication of life through the breath. He emphasizes both these aspects of touch and breath in the creation of the human being in the Quranic story of the creation of Adam. The tender intimacy of the direct contact symbolized by the making of Adam with God's two hands, and the breath in the blowing of the Spirit when God says, "When I have formed him and breathed into him of my Spirit." The intimacy of spirit in the human being, insan in Arabic is human being and derives from the same root as uns, intimacy. The intimacy of spirit in the human being has its origin in the direct contact symbolized by God's two hands, with all their opposing qualities, and the divine breath which communicates life, which is the breath of compassion through which being is bestowed. This is a perpetual blowing, for Ibn Arabi speaks of the constant effusion of the breath of compassion, incessantly bestowing life. What makes a legacy vibrant with life is the spirit which brings meanings alive, just as breath brings to life the combination of letters that make up the words in a creative process which releases the invisible into the visible, which allows the unspoken, which appears in the heart, to rise to the lips and to be spoken. As an Arab poet says, speech is in the heart. The tongue only indicates what is in it. Each Arabic letter is associated with a more interior or more exterior point of articulation, rising from the centre of the chest to the throat, the palate, the teeth, and finally the most exterior part of the lips. The breath gives expression to each letter and to each combination of letters which make up the words, and meanings are the life of the words. Ibn Arabi says, letters are containers for meanings, while meanings are the spirits of the letters. In this way, the human breath is intimately related to the divine breath of compassion, which releases the unexpressed divine names and qualities to manifest their effects in the world, words which suffer from not being fully expressed. In the blowing of this life-giving breath, God the Real gives ease to himself, since these names and qualities are within himself and refer to the single one named, since they are all aspects of himself. This gives relief, tanfis, a word which is lexically related to breath, nafas, and the self, nafs. For as Ibn Arabi says, everything is in the breath itself, like light in the darkness before dawn. It is this breath of compassion that relieves all distress in the divine exhalation. Knowledge, will, and ability all depend on life, and the living al-Hayy is a precondition for all the divine names. The names and qualities are given expression in the manifest world through the breath of compassion, which releases the names from the constriction of not manifesting their effects into the ease of displaying what they contain within themselves in potential. Ibn Arabi writes in the Fusus, whoever wants to know about the divine breath, let them know the world, because whoever knows their self knows their Lord, who manifests in them. That is, the world manifests in the breath of the all-compassionate, by which God relieved the divine names from the suffering of not manifesting their effects. He was gracious towards himself through what he brings into existence in his breath. Therefore, the first effect of the divine breath was in his own divine person. Then the order continues to descend with the general relief until the last of what exists. This kind of relief or ease, tanfis, which is lexically related to self and breath, is also related by meaning to another word for ease or repose, where the heart is soothed or gladdened through self-expression, and which is again lexically related to the spirit, the wind, and the sweet scent which it carries. In this way, the connection between these life-giving aspects is made clear. Ibn Arabi explains that God relieved the divine names from their state of contraction because he loves repose, raha, and only attains it through formal existence. This confirms that movement is motivated by love, and there is no movement in the world which is not a movement of love. In the same passage of the Fusus, Ibn Arabi explains this movement of love, which is the very existence of the world, as indicated by the divine saying, I was a hidden treasure, and I loved to be known, so I created the world. Ibn Arabi also says that movement is life. So this movement of love manifesting itself allows the divine perfection to be expressed in every degree of relative knowledge, as well as in the eternal knowledge, all of which is comprehended by the Absolute. Being therefore perfects itself at every level, for as there is nothing excluded from this all-encompassing oneness. The knowledge of this essential unity, expressed in all the diverse forms where reality reveals itself to itself, is like a spiritual rebirth. Finally, Muhyiddin ibn Arabi speaks again of this spiritual revivification in the chapter on Jesus in the Fusus. As for the spiritual bringing to life through knowledge, this luminous, sublime, eternal, divine life about which God said, "Or whoever was dead, and we brought him to life, and we made for him a light with which he walks among the people." He comments, "Anyone who revives a dead soul through the life of knowledge with regard to a particular question relating to the knowledge of God has brought him to life by it, so it is for him a light with which he walks among the people." Paying attention to our spiritual life makes us more predisposed to being brought into the light, and any question we may have relating to the knowledge of God may be illuminated through the writings which Ibn Arabi has left us. His writings breathe spirit into religion, bringing it alive in a way which is not only concerned with a fixed form, but which reaches to its very essence. Receptivity to the light allows the motion of constantly changing relationships to be illuminated in a never-ending display of beauty. In this way, Ibn Arabi leaves us a legacy which succeeds in providing us with fresh nourishment directly from the source, in a way that enlivens us and evokes the refreshing repose and reviving scent of which he reminds us. Thank you.